Hey everyone, welcome back to the Nexus Performance YouTube channel. I'm Zach, and today I've got a topic for you about programming. We're going to be talking a little bit about how to structure your sets a little bit differently to get the most out of your progression schemes when you're moving between phases and trying to drive some slightly different adaptations within your training. Before I jump into how I structure my programming and structure my clients' programming and how I use these different tweaks to set structures to get the most out of them, first we have to understand how we can structure these sets differently and why it can be beneficial. To put it simply, structuring your sets in some unique ways can do some interesting things. Firstly, it can be super beneficial to helping you manage fatigue and get some really good adherence from your clients, regardless of what type of person they are, and it can also help you integrate the sets a bit more appropriately into different phases of someone's program. For example, we can change the way that we integrate our working sets to better suit, say, a peaking phase, where the goal is to move a top single as well and as heavy as you can. When you're looking at powerlifting, the goal is to do that. It's to exhibit maximum strength within a meet. But that's not all we're doing throughout the entire year. We're focusing on building muscle, gaining skill, and doing a whole lot of things to make us better at powerlifting. So it would stand to reason that we can't just do straight sets or top sets all year round. Sometimes in training, we need slightly different stimuluses to drive slightly different adaptations. Firstly, we have to start differentiating between some of these set structures. And when I say set structures, it's important to mention that I'm talking about intra-structuring, not inter-structuring. The difference between those two things is an inter-set structure is working through how those sets progress over the course of a block and from week to week. When we're talking about intra-set structuring, we're looking at how those sets and those reps progress over the course of a singular session. So whether you're using straight sets, ramping sets, or a top set back down approach. For me, they're the three main ones that I tend to use. There are many other things that we can do and we can approach and use when programming, but for me, I like to keep it simple for the most part. It doesn't mean I don't use some of those other fancier, more convoluted structures from time to time. However, for me, I like to keep it simple, and those three are the ones that I use the majority of the time. For a bit of an explanation about each, so you kind of understand how each of these pieces fit in, for a straight set approach, it's really just looking at, say, prescribing a 5x5, you keep the same weight for the entire set, and you just slowly chip away at them. For a pyramid approach, what you do is you start at a lower weight, you ramp up to a top weight, and then you back off a little bit. So there's slightly inbuilt waves and troughs in that structure, which can be very useful. For a top set back down approach, you're looking at working up to a single top set and then taking a rather substantial cut down intensity and performing prescribed straight sets for back offs. It's important to remember that any of these approaches can be used at any intensity or any sort of volume. So you can do a bunch of singles in a straight set fashion. You can do sets of 10 of a ramping set. You can do a top set of 8 and back downs of 4. Whatever you want to do to make it fit into your current phase, you can adjust them. Which is why I guess when a coach is programming, it's where coaching and programming meet. You have to use your discretion to pick the best approach for a certain time in a prep or an off season for a specific person. Because a lot of these set structures can better suit certain personality types and certain traits of a lifter, and that's something that I'm going to go through now. In reality, it's quite simple to choose which approach, because to a certain extent, as long as you get the volume, the frequency, and the load right, they're all going to work. But as I said, there's more correct implementations of these specific structures. Say, for example, you have a person who chronically overshoots. You're not really going to give them a top set approach because they're going to take that lead and run with it. They're going to push it to the nth of the earth and most likely ruin some of the later progressions. So instead of using a top single, you can give them 4 top singles because there's going to be inherent load limitations within that slightly greater volume. In their peaking structure, you can keep their singles more sub-maximal, but give them a little bit more load. As you get closer and closer to comp, those 5 singles or 4 singles can slowly turn to 2 or 3. You can do these things to build in those limiters to make sure someone's not overshooting. Same for someone in an off-season phase. If you have somebody who chronically underworks, they don't push themselves, using something like a ramping set approach can give them little litmuses and little markers to slowly build up and say, oh, that top set wasn't my prescribed RPE, or that was too easy, and it gives them a prompt to push that little bit harder. understanding your lifters can really help you choose the best approach for them, and it's really going to help drive the adaptations you want from that phase. You can also take into account the lifter's skill levels or their comfort with certain progression schemes. Things like RPEs can work really, really well with a ramping set approach or a top set approach, because if a lifter can take their time, build up, and understand what each weight feels like and move on from there. For somebody who is a little less advanced and can't understand the concepts of RPE or auto-regulation, using straight sets and a more percentage-driven approach can give them a more broad exposure to the load without them having to think as hard. These things can really help the individual get the most out of their structure and think the least. Things like the lifter's overall technical proficiency can also come into account. If you have somebody who can't facilitate a large amount of volume and they need to hit that peak and really decrease because, say, their technique is rather inefficient or they have a hard time maintaining those higher intensities, you can use those top set approaches to really facilitate that. They can hit that top set with the most technical acuity that they can, and then once they've cooked themselves, they back off to some lighter work so they're not taxing their system as hard. For somebody who is a real workhorse, you can keep those intensities higher. Something like a straight set approach at a higher intensity may be a little bit easier to use and get the most out of them. Arguably, the most important thing to take into account is the lifter's enjoyment. If you have somebody who really loves hitting a top set and being able to, take the load off and feel accomplished after that set, you're probably going to be better off giving them top sets, listening to what your lifter not only responds to and what they fit in terms of their skill level and what they need, but if you're giving them set structures that they hate, their adherence to those structures is going to be a lot lower than giving them something that they actually enjoy. So working around what your lifter enjoys, making those choices as to what fits their phase, what fits them as a person, can really build a really strong picture of what approach will work best for them. Even if the approach they enjoy may not be exactly what they need, overall, as a coach, you're looking for adherence to a good plan. Even if they do the best plan but do it poorly, they're going to get less of a result than doing a good plan 100%. So as coaches, we need to pool all of this information together to make what seems like a rather simple choice a little bit more complicated. It may be simple, but it's not easy. There has to be some real thought going into how you structure these sets and how to get the most out of your lifters. Because if you choose whatever you think is best without really considering these other factors, sure, it's definitely going to work, and it's why things like templates have a place within the industry. But as coaches and people who are taking pride in writing programs for individuals, make your programs for individuals. It's an important aspect of being a good coach and pushing your lifters to the best they can be. Thank you guys for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. As usual, if you've got any questions, point them towards our socials, and I'll be happy to answer them.